Hello and welcome to Motion Graphics Basic Training. This is part 1 of a 6-part tutorial series where I'll be teaching you how to make this. So if you look carefully at the animation, there are a lot of things that are happening. To start off with, the mountains, the watchtower and the barbed wires, all of them animate at their own speed individually. And then there's a sticker which comes on and there's a lot of micro animations which go inside the sticker. Then the clouds keep moving and there's also a shooting star which goes behind the mountains and the clouds. And if you look very carefully, while the shooting star is animating, the CCTV camera also sort of follows the movement of the shooting star. So I'll teach you how to make this entire scene from scratch. Now, even if you're somebody who's never opened a design software before, I am confident I can teach you how to make this. I'm Arun Gopidas and let's get started. When you open up Illustrator, there are a couple of things that you see. One is some presets over here and some of the recent files that you've been working on. For now, we'll click on Create New. And I like to go with a 1920 by 1080 pixels, which I can see over here, but you might not find it here. So you might have to go to web and find it over there. Or if you're not able to find it here either, you can just input the value yourself, put 1920 in the width and 1080 at the height. And you need to make sure that in the advanced options, you have RGB color selected and not CMYK. So RGB is a digital color space, and for the purpose of this tutorial, we'll be using the RGB space. And now you need to click on Create. Now this is what your interface might look like, but so that we are on the same page and it's easier for you to follow along, I would advise you to go to Window, Workspace and click on Essentials Classic. So now we both should have similar looking interfaces, but if in case it still doesn't look like mine, you can just go into Window and look for whatever toolbar I'm referring to, which I'll tell you when we get to it. Now the first thing you need to notice about Illustrator is that this white box is our canvas, and as Illustrator likes to call it, this is the artboard in which we're going to work. So anything inside this is going to be visible and anything outside this is not going to be visible. It's going to be visible over here, but when you start exporting it, then it won't be. So to start off with the basics, I'm going to click on this rectangular tool and keep holding it down and go into my ellipse tool and click and drag in the center of my artboard. Now I want you to go to the zoom tool and click and hold. Now what you'll see is no matter how much you zoom in, this never pixelates. Now that is one of the good things about Illustrator, that all of the shapes in Illustrator are created using calculations, which means that, for example, this circle has 4 points, 1, 2, 3 and 4, and all the points between these two or the others are all mathematically put in place and rendered. So A, it won't pixelate, and B, since they are all mathematical equations, the file sizes are extremely small. So these are two good reasons to start using Illustrator. Now I'll just delete this circle and I'll get started with the first tool, which is the selection tool. And what it helps you do is select different things on your artboard. Now we don't have any objects, so let's go create some objects. So I'll come down to the circle tool, or it might be a rectangular tool for you. And let's click on the rectangular tool and click and drag and make a couple of objects. Now when you go to the selection tool, you can click to choose which object you want to select. So you can select it to move it or make it bigger or smaller. And when you come to the handles, you can see when you come to this corner, you can click and drag it in this direction, or you can go to this corner and click and drag it in this direction, or you can go to the corners click and drag that, or click and drag this, and you can change things around. So that's number one. Now, what if you want to change this shape itself to maybe look like something else? So that's where we need the direct selection tool, which is the second tool. Now what this allows you to do is click on the individual points and you can start manipulating them. So if I want it to look like an arrow, I could probably create something like this. So just remember, this was a square when we started off. Or if you want to create like a pot, then, or a glass, you can probably try doing something like this. And the possibilities are pretty endless, but this is a very powerful tool, and yes, that's what that does. And now let's look at adding some colors. So now that we have these three different shapes, we want to go into coloring it. So let's look at this toolbar over here. And the first rectangle is the fill, which is what's inside it, inside an object. The second is the outline, which is basically the stroke. So I can double click on the white and say make it into red. Now there are multiple ways to change the color. So there is one way is to select something over here, and then you can change the color value from here, or you can change the HSB, the hue, saturation and brightness settings, or you can change the RGB, which is the red, green and blue channels, or you can affect the CMYK, the cyan, magenta, yellow and black. So if I want it to be completely magenta, I can put 100 over here, 0 and 0, and now I'll have a pink, a magenta, and I can click OK, and that's what I have over here. Similarly, I can click on this glass and make it into a blue, and I can click on this and I can probably make it a yellow. Now another thing that I want to point out right now is that you can reverse the color as well. So right now the stroke is black and the color inside is magenta. Now if I go into this curved double-headed arrow, I can click it and now it's become the opposite. If I zoom in and see this, the stroke has become pink. So now if you're wondering how I zoomed in, you can go and click on this magnifying glass and you can zoom in, and you can press Alt to zoom out. You can see the magnifying glass, when you press Alt, it changes from plus to minus. So plus makes you zoom in and minus makes you zoom out. So that's with color. Now with color comes the outline, and for outline, you can click on the object and you can see this tab open up, which is the appearance tab, which has a stroke to it. So now you can increase the stroke size to make it bigger or smaller. Now there are a couple of things that you can do with this. You can click on the word stroke and it'll open up this toolbar, and from here you can do a couple of different things. You want the corners to be curved, or you want it to be solid, or if you want a round cap. So I'll show these examples later properly, but what's important right now is that you can change the stroke how it's aligned. So it could be in the middle. So now half the stroke is this side, half the stroke is outside, or it can be completely inside, or it could be completely outside. So these are a couple of options that you can use. So that's what stroke does. Moving on, so we can go into probably the text tool. So text tool is pretty straightforward. You can click on it and just type in your text, and then go into your selection tool and grab one of the handles and make it bigger or smaller. But what you need to make sure is press shift so that it scales up or down proportionally. And this is very important. You don't want your text to look like this or like this. You want it to look nice. Now the font can be changed from here, the character toolbar, or if you don't find it here, it's over here as well, and you can't find it there either, then you can go into type and character. And you can choose whatever font you want. For example, Open Sans looks great to me. And you can change the weight over here. You can change the size over here, and you can change the alignment of the text, something similar to how you can do it in Word. And the same tools are available here also, so you can choose to do from wherever you want. So the next tool that we want to talk about is probably the rectangle tool. So you've seen how the rectangle is formed. You press and hold it and it brings out a menu. You've seen a circle. Now let's go to polygon. Now polygon is pretty simple. So by default, I think it creates a 6-sided polygon. Now if you want to increase the number of sides of this polygon, you can click on this and click anywhere and it will show you how many sides you want. So I can just create a polygon with 11 sides, or I can create a polygon with 4 sides, which is a square, and so on and so forth. Alternatively, you have this diamond shape over here. You can drag it up or down to increase and decrease the number of sides as well. So that's something pretty interesting. Similarly with a star, by default it comes with 5, but you can always increase the number of sides to it. You can even affect the inner radius and the outer radius, so you can make it 45 and 50, and you'll see how it's different. Even though they have the same number of sides, they look very different from one another. So that are some of the basic shapes. I delete all of them. So let's create another rectangle. And now that we know how to put one solid color in it, now let's talk about how to put a gradient. So for a gradient, you need to click on this small little toolbar that you see over here, and that will convert it into a gradient. So now we have a gradient which goes from white to black. So if you want to change the color, so there are a couple of different kinds of gradients. So this is a linear gradient which goes from point A to point B in a straight line, or you can go for a radial gradient which goes in a circular fashion, or you can go to a freeform gradient which has multiple stops, which is slightly more harder, but let's get to that later. Now for the gradient, I currently have a white to black gradient, so I can just double click. This shows the white point and this shows the black point, and these are important too. It's at 100% opacity right now, which means it's completely solid, and it's at location 0. And for the black one, it's at location 100 and at again 100% opacity, which means completely solid. To change this, I can just double click on this, and now I have this window, and I can click on this button over here and change it to any of the others to change the color. So for now I'll stick to RGB, and now I can change the color to whatever I want, and similarly double click on the other one, go to RGB and change the color. So now you can see it transitions from an orange to a green. So what I'll do is I'll just create another solid which is probably say blue, and I'll right click on it and arrange and send it to back. So now you see it's completely solid, but if I have to go into my gradient, the gradient window can be found here as well, or you can go to window and go to gradient to find that. Now if I click on the orange and make the opacity 0, now you will see that the green is still transitioning to an orange, but the orange is completely transparent. So now it sort of goes into blue, which is the background. And similarly, if I don't want it to be 0, I can make it 50%. So now you can slightly see through it and see the blue color, but it's not completely orange. And similarly for the green, you can do the same, and you can adjust how it appears. For now, I'll keep it back to say 100%, and I'll get it back. Now this small triangle that you see, that's the midpoint of the gradient. So ideally I would want it to be 50 so that it's a smooth transition. You can change it depending on what you are trying to do. Now while this is going in a straight line, if I wanted to go diagonally, I would need to click on the gradient tool And this sort of brings up this line which tells me this is going from orange to green with a midpoint in the center. Now I can click on this point and drag it to change the orientation of the gradient. Now it could be outside the limit of the square, or it could be completely inside, or it could be a very short one. Now that's completely up to you, but this is how you can manipulate the gradient. Now another thing that we can do is change the type of gradient to a circular. So now the exact same thing is happening. Now you can change the width of the gradient, or you can change the size of the gradient. And yeah, that's pretty much mostly how this gradient works. Okay, so now that we have covered that, let's look at the pen tool. The pen tool is the fourth tool over here, and it's the most powerful tool there is in Illustrator, and it's a common tool between Illustrator, Photoshop, Premiere and After Effects. And the best part about this tool is that you can literally create any shape with this. Yeah, that doesn't look very cool, but you get the point. So if I want to create a house, I can just go and create a house. Or if I want to create a phone, I can create a phone like this. It's a very basic phone, you get the point. So if I spend a lot of time on it, I can create any shape out of this. And that's the pen tool, and it's very powerful. So I won't teach you how to use this in this tutorial because it's really hard to explain, and it's a very time consuming process, and it takes a lot of practice to get a command over this tool. And for the purpose of this tutorial, we don't really need this, so I'll skip this for now. Then there's the eyedropper tool. Eyedropper tool is pretty useful. So if I have 3 rectangles and say the first one is green and the second one is blue, and I want this third one to be a green, and I don't want to set it again, I don't know how to check the color value. So what I can do is I can just use the eyedropper tool. While this rectangle is selected, I can just go pick the color. So now it'll be the exact shade wherever you're picking it up from is. So you can be the shade of your artboard as well. So that's the eyedropper tool. And then this hand tool is pretty important. It helps you move around. So that's important. Zoom tool is pretty important. And there are a couple of shortcuts that you should remember. One is for the selection tool, which is a V. So V for Vendetta. So you can just move that around. The direct selection tool is available with a A. So remember that. Zoom tool is available with a Z. And the hand tool is available with a H. So V, A, Z, H. So these are very common and you would need them again and again. So now that these things are covered, now let's move on to something in which we use a path, but we used to write on it. So if you have, say, a path which goes like this. So the pen tool creates paths. Okay, these things are called paths. So I create a path like this. I'll press escape to come out, and then I'll press the direct selection tool or V on the keyboard, and now I have this path. So now it's set to fill, so that's why it looks so weird. So I'll just change it back to only outline. So now we have a stroke or a path like this. So now if I want a text to run on this path, that's something Illustrator allows me to do. So now I'll click the type tool and I'll go to the path, and you'll see the path gets highlighted and the cursor changes. So I can just click on it and I can type in my text, Control A, and I can increase the size, and now you can see that the text sort of follows the path. So this is pretty interesting. And the other thing to notice is that there are a couple of points, so there's a point over here, there's a point over here, there's a point over here. So this point is the starting point. So usually try to keep it at the beginning of the path. And this is the ending of the path, so keep it towards the end. And this middle one helps you transition from this side of the path to that side of the path. So now why it's important for me to get it to the beginning is because when I do something like a center align, it snaps it exactly at the center, knowing how much distance here it is and how much distance there is from this point. But if it weren't in the center, then it will just become slightly more difficult for me. The next thing I want to talk about is the Pathfinder tool. So this is about building shapes. So if I have a rectangle tool and I want to make a t-shirt, so I can make another rectangle tool over here for the arms. And I can make another one which is over here. Oh wait a second, I'll just copy this one. So I'll go to my selection tool, I'll go to edit, copy, edit, paste, which is Control C and Control V, and I'll put it over here. So now my t-shirt looks good enough, like obviously not proportion wise, but it looks like a t-shirt, except now I need a neck. So for that I need to go into my ellipse tool and come somewhere in the center and click outwards while I press Alt. So now from that point it's expanding outwards, the circle that I have. So I think right around here the neck looks good, but now it's extruding outwards. So I don't want it to extrude outwards, so I'll just select both of these together and go into my Pathfinder tool, which is right over here for me, and I'll click on minus front. So what it does is the top object gets subtracted from the bottom object, and now I have the neck of the t-shirt. So now I'll also see that, you know, like this arm is not attached to the t-shirt. So what I can do is I can select these two together and I can press on this button, which is a unite tool, and now it's one single shape. And I can do the same with this one, I can unite it as well. So now I have a t-shirt which is one single object. Alternatively, if I did not want to unite these two together, I could have just selected all of them together and grouped them. So when they are grouped, though they are individual objects, I can move them around together. Or I can select all of them together and I can unite them together. But that's what the Pathfinder tool does. It does a lot of other cool things also, like if there are two circles which I have created. So if I press Alt and move a circle, I'll get another copy. Or you can just do edit, copy, edit, paste, and you'll get two circles. And if I want to have that area where these two circles unite together and not have any of the other regions, I could probably press on the third one to intersect. So now this is interesting to use if you're making an eye. So you can click on the swap button and now you have the outline of an eye, and you can probably put an eyeball inside as well, and then swap it again, and now you've got an eye. What is the last one? So the last one is the opposite. So if I click on this, the middle portion won't be there and everything else would be there. I don't use this very often, but I think it can be used somewhere. Okay, now let's get into aligning objects. So now again we'll have three rectangles, and first of all they are not aligned to anything. So what I can do is I can select all three of them together and go into window and align, or it's available over here for me, which the first thing I need to do is I can click on this because it's easier to use and it has all the tools. I have to click on align to, and I have three different options. One is align to selection. So what happens in align to selection is whatever is aligned will be within the bounds of these three objects. So I can align these objects horizontally. So now everything is horizontally aligned, and I can align everything vertically. So now everything is vertically aligned to each other. So now I'll undo that, and the same thing can be done with a key object. Now a key object needs to be specified. So if I say this is a key object, now this will have a darker outline as compared to this, and then I can align things to this. Anyways, I think this is getting slightly more complicated at this point, so let's leave that. But what's important is the align to artboard, and an align to artboard will align objects with respect to the artboard. So you can click the horizontal centers and vertical centers to make sure every object is centered. Or if you want these to be evenly spaced out, and you can click on the horizontal distribute to make sure they're evenly spaced out. So right now it's different sized objects, so it's harder to see this. But if they were the same sized objects, and say one of them was further away, and you do an align to selection, and now you'll see that there's the same amount of distance between these objects. And if they were on top and at the bottom, similarly align to object, and yeah, I think it's already aligned, distributed evenly. If I can show you like this, see, now it snaps. So that's aligning. And okay, now I think let's move on to the last thing I want to cover, which is, say if you have three different shapes, which is, and say a star. Now here is where we start thinking about animating these objects. So now in order for them to be animated, which is probably the next tutorial, now in order to be animated, these different objects need to be in different layers. For that we need to go to window and go to layers, and that's the layers panel that we have. Now this is layer number 1. You can add more layers from this button, and you can delete layers with this button. Now I want to click on my square first and press Command X or edit cut, and then create a new layer and press Command Shift V or Control Shift V or edit paste in place. So now what all three were in one layer, now my square is in layer 2. Now I can go to my circle and I can do the exact same thing where I cut it, I create a new layer and I paste it. All three of my objects are in 3 different layers, and all of them have a different color as well. And we can rename it as well. So we'll rename this as star, we'll rename this as circle, and we'll rename this as square. Now we can change the color just so it looks a little more fancy, maybe not so bright, maybe slightly less bright. Maybe we can give this an orange, I think, and then we can make this into a blue. So now we have these 3 shapes and we are ready to move on. Also, one last thing which I forgot to mention is that if you click on any of these objects, you can go to the side of the diagonal and where you see this curved arrow, and you can rotate it. So this is a circle, so you won't really notice it, but if you do that to a star, you'll see that you can rotate objects. Or you can rotate objects by going to transform, right clicking, transform and rotate, where you can add some values like say 32.256, and you can hit on preview to see how much of a change will happen, and you can rotate it to whatever angle you want over here. And yeah, I think that's about it. As a last step, I want you guys to save this file, and I think I'll save it on the desktop for now. I'll create a new folder, which is basic training and T1, it's tutorial 1, and these are my shapes. And that brings us to the end of part 1. I hope you were able to follow along. The next part deals with the basics of After Effects, so stay tuned for that. And until then, just explore the software, see what all it can do, and consider subscribing to my channel if you liked it, and I'll see you in the next one.